One thing you'll figure out when you examine human cultures and human societies, and that is that people have the tendency to flee from difficulties and challenges. And often people don't want to admit that they just want to get away from challenges and difficulties because that will not look good on them. So people often will come up with excuses for what they're doing. For example, let's say a woman wants to divorce her husband. And everyone is shocked. Everyone's thinking, but the guy's treating you well. The children are happy. Why do you want a divorce? And then, after the divorce is finished, they suddenly see her with another guy. And she ends up being pregnant, even though she didn't have sexual intercourse with the husband for several months. Then everyone understood, she was cheating on her husband and she found out she was pregnant. That's why she wanted to divorce so quickly. So people, when they look at the context, realize, this is why she wanted to divorce, because she was cheating on the man for a while. And maybe it's not the first time she cheated. Now, in this case, she was unhappy because she had expectations that were not met. Instead of facing herself and change her expectations, she wanted to flee. She fled into an affair, but she got pregnant. She didn't plan that, but the man she was cheating with really wanted to become a dad, and she decided, you know what, I need to escape from my marriage just to be with this guy. She didn't want to abort the baby. That means she would have to face the disappointment of her lover, and she had to face the disappointment of her husband. She knew that her husband will likely ask for divorce anyway after finding out she has been cheating on him. So she thought it may be better to end the marriage and continue with this guy. Now, in that example I gave onto you, it's obvious that the woman was covering something up. Now, if on an individual basis, common people cover up a lot of stuff, because being direct and open about everything will backfire, what do you think is going on with governments, countries, and corporations, and big organizations? For example, let's take the story of the American Revolution, in the sense that how the United States became independent. The independence of the United States coincided with a war between the British Empire and the Spanish Empire concerning the Spanish informal aid to the American Revolution. Now, think about the story of the American Revolution for a moment. Because this story, it has so many holes in it. Look, before 1763, most of North America was French. But the French mismanaged their colonies. A lot of the native population, I'm talking about the Native Americans, were unhappy with the French. The British had several colonies at the East Coast, and they had some settlements in the French areas. After 1763, most of North America became Spanish, and the rest was ceded to Britain. So besides the 12, or some say 13 colonies, Canada became British, Acadia became British, so everything became British there. 1763, remember that. And from the Mississippi to the west was all Spanish, going all the way to Alaska. Now the Alaska region, back then known as Oregon, was already Spanish, but when the French were removed from the Mississippi area, it was divided between Britain and Spain. And Spain conceded Florida to Britain also. Now, 1763. Now that Britain was mastering a big portion of North America, and North America was quite close to Britain, they now had to maintain that big territory. And here is the big challenge. Britain was bankrupted by this 7 Years' War. This big war that led to Britain becoming master of a big portion of North America, it bankrupted Britain. Britain back then was Great Britain, that's Scotland and England united, and Ireland. It was not the UK yet. it became the UK in 1801 when the Kingdom of Ireland joined Great Britain into one state. But anyway, Ireland was governed by the same British king anyway. What it comes down to is that Britain now had to maintain a big portion of North America. They had to build roads, they had to build more ports, they had to continue the French trade, they had to incorporate the British economy, and soon it became clear that Great Britain, or let me say Britain, would not survive managing most of their North American territories. Because Britain also had Jamaica. They also had the Bahamas, which were then called Lucayan Islands. They also had some other Caribbean islands. They also had the Mosquito Coast in Central America, and they had Belize Town. So in North America, Britain had a lot of territories. And in the Caribbean, you had the slave plantations. But the problem was the slave plantations did not bring that much revenue to Britain. They did not. And in North America, what became Canada, the trade was more centered on native products, for example, bear skins or produce of local farms. So there was not that much industry over there. Now, in the province of New York or Pennsylvania or in all those other provinces, there was more trade going on. There was more merchandise also. But trade there depended on trade with the Spanish and Portuguese. And Spain had the most dominant empire back then, which also overshadowed the Portuguese Empire. So Britain had its mastery in North America, but it was a glory on paper. But in practice, it was quite difficult to integrate all of this. Besides that, Britain wanted to abolish slavery. Now, slavery on the main islands of Britain was already abolished, but now they want to abolish it in the colonies also. Why? Because slavery was quite expensive. So Britain wanted to get rid of it. However, in their 12 colonies, or 13 colonies at the eastern shores of what today's United States, a lot of those people, especially those in the South, they don't want to give up slavery, because if they would give up slavery, what else would they have? And Britain realized that if they want to abolish slavery, they would have to pay compensation to the slave owners. And they would have to sponsor an alternative economy. And which alternative economy would they establish? And here's the thing. Britain did not have such a booming economy to pay everyone a wage. So either they kept slavery, which was also expensive, or they had to transform to another economy. So what did Britain do? Britain was expanding in Asia, namely South Asia. South Asia and Southeast Asia were the two areas where Britain was expanding. Britain already had a grip in South Asia. They also had a grip in some ports in Africa. So Britain wanted to expand in Asia because South Asia had a lot of workers that were able and willing to work for the British. Now, I'm not saying everyone, but that was the British were a dominant economic power in South Asia back then, and they want to expand this. They also want to go to Southeast Asia. So Britain was about to reform its society to include future territories in South Asia, because Britain needed income from South Asia to keep their British economy going. Before 1763, there was no British Empire. Before that, you had Great Britain and Ireland, and you had they had some overseas settlements, And before 1707, yet Scotland and England were not united. So Scotland had some colonies, England had some colonies. So before 1763, there was no actual British Empire. The British Empire became a fact in reality in 1763. However, this empire was something new and was quite overwhelming to keep it all going. So the expansion in Asia was a solution. But here's the catch. If Britain would keep its focus on Asia, they would have to let go of some other territories. Because Britain did not have the manpower, nor the political, nor administrative capacity to both master big portion of North America as well as big portion of South Asia. It would become too much. So what would be the solution? Now, the obvious solution would be to concede some territory to another colonial power, but that would be seen as a loss, and that would not motivate the imperial economy of Britain. So, suddenly, when Britain was faced with this dilemma, you had riots emerging in New York City and in Boston concerning taxes. And those tax riots added up in a whole revolutionary movement, so-called, in which they declared themselves independent of the British Empire. Now, you have several countries being established. You have the Vermont country, or the Vermont Republic. You had some other republic called the Tennessee Republic was also established, I believe. So you had all these countries being called out, being declared. And at some point, the British Parliament came with a peace treaty in which it would recognize the United States. But hold on a minute. If the tax situation was so bad, why didn't British people in the Caribbean nor the Bahamas revolt? Why didn't those at the Mosquito Coast nor Belize revolt? Belize is also British Honduras. Why didn't people in Canada revolt? Why didn't they revolt over there? And here's the thing. In the Revolutionary War, when the United States had its Revolutionary Army, it was around 2 or 3% of the young men that joined the military. So that means that most of the people back then had no interest in any independence. So this whole American Revolutionary War, as if the British people fought to have their own country, it doesn't add up with historical evidence. Furthermore, George Washington was not deeply involved with the formation of the country, yet he became the president later on. That's also weird. Now, I'm not saying that there were no riots and no escalations, because Britain had civil wars before, so it wouldn't surprise me if it had another civil war, but this time only in the colonies. But look at this. Britain had an enormous navy. The navy of Britain even exceeded the navy of the Spanish Empire. And there were quite some young men in Britain that were serving in the navy. So if there were riots in New York and in Boston, there were also British naval bases in what today call Canada. Why didn't the British Navy that was stationed in Canada just sail down and deal with the issue? Or if Britain was serious about maintaining North America, they could have enforced a conscription into the military, sent several thousands of men, and they would have shut it all thing down. They could have even relocated some of their warships that were in India all the way to North America to deal with the situation. Now, what you see about this American Revolution thing is that it's quite chaotic. there was no common agreement on what the future of the new country would be. There were so many territorial disputes going on. And suddenly, it was only after Britain decided to come with the Peace of Paris that they rushed and they established a US Constitution. Isn't that the first thing you do when you want to establish a new country? Is establish a constitution that gives a clear vision for the future? So let me get it straight. In 1776, okay, that is 14 years. 14 years after the British Empire became a fact worldwide, you had riots emerging in North America, mainly in New York, Boston, and those areas. Then, 1783, the country was recognized. 1788, that's 5 years later, there was a draft for constitution, and constitution was established 1789. That's a bit odd. And George Washington was seated in 1790 as the first president of the United States of America. No. Well, actually, my bad. He was already installed in 1789, in April. However, it was in 1790 that many of the states joined the Union. So let me get it straight. George Washington becomes president in April 1789, but the borders of the country were not even clear because some of the rebellious British colonies did not even join the Union yet. Oh, hold on, I thought there was a constitution in 1788 that was drafted, that was approved in 1789. But why is it that, for example, North Carolina agreed in late 1790 to be part of the United States? So that means that many of the British folks that so-called want independence, they don't want to join the United States. And look at this. After the quote-unquote loss of the United States, there was a big boom in British activity in South Asia. And don't forget about this. Britain also had a penal colony in Australia called Port Arthur, which later became the city of Sydney. So Britain was also building colonies in Australia. So Britain increases activity on the Pacific and in South Asia after the loss of the United States. But Britain, even before there was any riots in the United States, any independence cry, they already intended to expand in the Pacific and South Asia. But they realized they can't do both. They can't both expand in North America and in the Pacific and South Asia at the same time. So when you look at the context of the situation, and you find out that both on the revolutionary side as well as on the British side, both parties were Freemasons, most of them, you come to the conclusion that it seems like this was a deal that was made to benefit the British Empire. By the United States separating from the British Empire, it would have been a domestic fight amongst the British people that was resolved. And now, because Britain didn't have to spend all their finances and expensive power on North America, they could now spend it in South Asia and the Pacific. Some say, Rashid, that's a conspiracy theory. Now, I'm not dealing with conspiracy theories here. I'm dealing with facts. George Washington becomes president in April 1789. But it's in 1790 that the many states joined the Union. So there was a union on paper, but not in practice? Why did North Carolina wait so long to ratify the Constitution of the United States? Well, for over a year, there was already a president of the United States. Why this hesitation? Was it maybe that the people in North Carolina had no intention of being part of the United States? Was it maybe that they were kind of coerced and forced to be part of this thing called the United States? By the way, after 1783, or let's say after George Washington was installed as president, during the presidency of George Washington, there were still British military forts on the territory of the United States. There still was. How is this possible? Look, the whole situation of the American Revolution, I already explained it to you. It is a hoax. Yes, there were riots amongst the white British people. It may relate to taxes, maybe not. And there was a reorganization that happened. But there was no American Revolution. There was no patriotic fight to get their own country. That is a religious hoax they tell US citizens. When you look at the context of the British Empire, it becomes clear. The British Empire was not ready to deal with both expansions, both in Asia and with the Pacific and North America. They had to choose. Either we focus completely on North America, or we focus completely on Asia. And when you look at it, that is what happens. The loss of those 13 colonies, and for some reason, Canada, which included the province of Quebec and Acadia and Newfoundland, all of those remained British. I mean, why didn't they join the Americans then? So those 13 colonies became a county United States of America. And now, look at this. The United States of America, after being recognized, still had to pay reparations to Britain. How can it be that you win a war and you need to pay compensation to the losing party? In every war, when you lose, you're the one paying. You're the one that won, so you decide the terms. But in the independence of the United States, it was Britain that set the terms. Britain set the terms, and in those terms, they had to pay damages to Britain. So the United States ended up paying damages to Britain, and Britain ends up investing in Australia, what later became New Zealand, and in South Asia. It seems to me that this whole independence of the United States, that it was a plot to preserve the interests of the British Empire. And remember, just because the nationality of the people changed doesn't mean they were different people. They were still people from British ancestry. They still spoke British. They still had relatives across the oceans. So those politicians and people in the economy in the country was now the United States, they still had close ties to the economy of Britain. When you look at it historically, the United States in the beginning remained economically dependent on Britain. The difference was Britain now was not obliged to financially cover the area of the United States. And the people of the United States could not demand anything from the British government because now they were independent. Yet, the United States paid damages to Britain. So, actually, the public of the early United States, they were scammed into benefiting the British Empire while they were kicked out of the British Empire. Now, this is not a fun story to tell your children. It's easier to tell them that there were brave men, all of them white, for some reason, that fought against their white king, George, who was enforcing tyranny on them. And they fought for their freedom. And we have this great country established on biblical principles and where everyone is equal. This is called the United States. Yet the Constitution of the United States consists of amendments. And amendments when you want to amend or restore a relationship. If Britain was oppressive and you guys fought to establish your own country, the one should amend is Britain, not you. If Britain was the bad guy and you guys fought against Britain and you won, why is it that when you establish your constitution, you talk about amendments? What are you amending? Look, a lot of folks don't question these things. Well, I just did. There was never an American Revolution. There was never this big fight against King George III of Hanover and the UK. Before it was called UK, was Great Britain and Ireland. There was never such a fight. There were fights, there were many riots that emerged after the United States was formally declared independent. That shows you that many of the people didn't want anything to do with it. So, was the independence of the United States merely a Freemasonic scam to preserve the financial interests of the British Empire? Well, that's what it seems like it. You have your thoughts based on proof that you think it was something else. Well, you can let me know in the comment section. Anyway, thanks for listening. Keep on agreeing with Christ and be at peace.